coolest station in the world. And we are your hosts, Dr. T
Dr. Fishta.
and you can catch us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Periscope. So, ladies and gentlemen, today we are continuing the purpose of our show, which is to reduce the stigma around mental health. And we have some very special guests that will be joining us in the via phone today,
Yep.
not on in the studio. So, Dr. Fishta, with everything that has been going on with COVID, the election, and just everyday life, we know that we can get stressed out, fed up, and burnt out.
Yep. Well, it's talking about addiction, substance abuse, which is often a byproduct of some form of mental health turmoil, so to speak. It's been just not a good scene there.
Right.
So we had the isolation, the quarantine, right?
Right.
And lots of people they got off track. So looking at the population, folks who extensively use substances. So many folks who are unable to get their substances, many of them were more depressed, more anxious, having withdrawals and so forth. Then we came out of quarantine, and the spike in overdoses, the numbers in overdoses went up. There was a spike. The reason is the psychophysiology has changed after several weeks of no systematic use of what the body is used to.
Exactly.
And there were some major issues. And also we already know that in general population, the substance abuse has gone up significantly during these very stressful times. And the elections clearly did not help with that at all.
No, it did not. And normally we already have issues with individuals seeking treatment or mental health treatment. A lot of individuals do not feel as if their mental health is as important as their physical health.
Correct.
Not realizing that their mental health can actually lead to medical issues as well.
Correct, and particularly talking about addictions, if you look at the AA or 12 step programs, right? One of the first steps there is accepting or admitting that there's a problem, right? So that's number one, and oftentimes people could be in denial about their substance use or abuse. People can try to get away from it themselves. There is shame, there is stigma that goes along with that, and oftentimes family, friends, and others look at people as less than, and they judge naturally because obviously they want the best of them, not realizing that there are significant difficulties that that individual is going through.
Right, and I have clients that have told me how challenging it was for them to even tell their family members that they were seeking counseling because of the fear of being judged or thinking that they were not strong enough to handle the situation by themselves.
Well, and keep in mind, Dr. T, that often you hear people say that either they have a family member or themselves that they're a functioning alcoholic, right? What does that really mean? That means that they're using more than they really want to. However, their areas of functioning are not being significant. They're severely impacted.
Right, so they can still get up and go to work.
They still can get up and go to work. They maintain relationships. They go about their daily business, yet the use is there. Now, obviously, there are risks involved in that. In so many ways, because once you add stress, once things in life are under a person's perceived control, substance could help kind of bury those emotions. And
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. And that's that fear that kind of, to me, when we're talking about clients who are coming in for treatment, that to me demonstrates how deeply embedded our society is with basically keeping the stigma
Yep.
of mental health as a negative thing.
Yep. And just to see the overall impact of substance abuse, in 2016, over 65,000 people died due to opioid-related deaths, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then in 2017, that number went to over 75,000. I have not looked at the last couple of years what those numbers are, but there's an increase. So we have an opioid epidemics. Actually, it's a pandemic because Europe and other continents are dealing with it in a major
Mm-hmm.
way. Now, as we already know, in part there was a man-made problems because of pharmaceuticals pushing the painkillers, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
until the doctors stopped prescribing them, and the person would go on the street. And often, when you see people segue into either be heroin, there's cost related to it. There is different reasons why a person could end up using heavy duty substances,
Right.
and usually there is no good outcome whatsoever.
No, it's not. And then just recently, was it Purdue Pharmaceutical Company?
Correct. They got
They just
penalized big
yes,
time. And,
big lawsuit, $4.1 million that they had to pay out.
I believe was in with a B,
Billion.
with a billion. It's major,
Mhm.
because it was a man-made problem. And if you saw the Congress was addressing that and the courts, what happened basically was the farm reps were getting out to the doctors and really encouraging doctors to prescribe it. However, the data presented was not accurate.
Hmm.
Uh,
And that's normal.
Right.
For pharmaceutical companies and big industries to basically lie about their results, whether something is going to be harmful for society. I mean, big tobacco did it for years.
Yep. Now, keep in mind too, looking at all dynamics there, Dr. T. There's a catch-22 there, right? Look what's happening now with the rush or surge for this vaccine for COVID. We are at the hands of pharmaceuticals again. Because of lack of something different, right? So as much as they have created certain problems, there's also the humanity depends on them in so many ways.
Right.
And this was a best example of that with COVID again,
Right.
as we hear about vaccines.
But even with the medications that are prescribed, either, opioids, these are still medications that are supposed to help people with their ailments.
Well, and there's several things there that were factors, right? Patient goes to the doctor, says, "Doctor, I have pain," right? And doctor prescribes opioids, and it really works, right? It kills the pain. It manipulates the pain receptors in a magical way, so to speak. However, once a person uses a certain amount of time and certain amount of opioids, now you don't only have physical pain when you come off of it, you also are dealing with major emotional negative impact. So coming off of it, now again you have the pain, which you pick her up kind of where you left off in so many ways. And the other major problem is the emotional turmoil. So the withdrawals, you're looking at depression, you're looking at anxiety, in some cases psychosis,
Right.
and other conditions that
Yeah.
are nearly impossible for people to deal with on their own, depending on the degree of the substance use and abuse.
Right, because there's even physical symptoms with the shakes and
correct.
chills and
That's
the
correct.
body aches, the muscle aches, the headaches, and all of that goes along with withdrawing from a
A
substance.
person becomes very ill physically, and again, there's a direct major emotional impact in addition to that. So things become much worse than when you started, which was some form of physical pain that often the doctors prescribe.
Right.
Now, obviously, that's a portion of the problem, right? The other part of it is an increase in mental health issues, often people self-medicating, and so forth, which can lead to problems. Then the other part of it is often early childhood or other traumas in person's life that could lead to later substance abuse.
Right.
And
even me talking about, let's talk like misusing medication. Like, I've seen so much research over the past few years where college students are actually using Ritalin
yep,
to
all
keep
stimulants, Ritalin, Adderall, Concerta, all those, right?
And those are supposed to be for individuals that have attention deficit or
That's correct, yep.
hyperactivity disorder, to keep them able to focus.
Yep.
so that they can actually get their tasks done because they literally have an issue with staying focused.
Now, I am concerned from what I know in my observation, working with people and talking to professionals in the field, that that may be the next epidemics coming up and getting close to opioid, which I think is still under the radar. Because that's correct. You have a significant increase in college students, right? There is that need to perform, is that pressure to perform.
Exactly.
Sure, Adderall, Concerta, and others can immediately help. The problem is at what cost? What does it mean a week from now? What does it mean a month from now?
A year from
a year
now,
or for the
even
remainder of
10
your life.
years. Exactly. You're using a chemical that is not prescribed for you, and
Correct.
it's causing your brain to react.
And there is, in some rare cases, when an individual doesn't have actually ADHD that's properly diagnosed, the use of these stimulants, it's similar agents as they are in methamphetamine and some of these heavy-duty drugs that can have a major impact in person's overall functioning in their life.
Yes. And I don't think people are that much aware of how much, if you use a substance that you do not need, how it does actually change your brain chemistry.
So you have the stimulants, you have the opioids, then you have the benzodiazepines.
Okay, I think we have a call. Hello, your caller, you're in session with Dr. T and Fishta. How are you today? I think we still have this caller. Our phone lines are open. You can call in at 313-355-6018. Caller, if you're still there, say hello. Hello, caller. I think we have, well, until we are able to get the caller on the line, because I do see them calling in, we'll continue our conversation.
Yeah. So a mixture of some of these substances or drugs can be deadly, and it often is, right? Benzodiazepines are a downer. They decrease the functioning of central nervous system. Then you use some form of stimulants, including methamphetamine or cocaine. They're uppers. And if alcohol as well, even small amounts, it can be lethal, can be deadly. And oftentimes, basically, what you're telling your central nervous system, your mind, is that calm down,
Exactly.
calm down. Person goes to sleep. It calms down so much that it even puts the parts of the brain that maintain the vitals while we're asleep. It basically tells them you no longer needs to function, and a person dies asleep.
Exactly. So we are talking about mental health stigma and how we can help reduce this mental health stigma. And we're going to have a couple of guests that are coming on today that actually created a scale to actually measure the fitness for, I believe the scale is
Stigma?
the fitness, stigma, and value scale.
Okay.
And they should be joining us really soon. And you are listening to In Session on WJZZ Cool TV, the coolest station in the world. Caller, do we have you with us? Okay, we will get back with you. I know we have some calls coming in. I think the lines are getting a little bit jammed with people trying to call in at the same time. I'm not sure, but we will just continue with our conversation. Caller? Okay. Dr. Ed Newcrook and then Dr. Sandra Griffith should be joining us momentarily as we will be discussing their scale and how, what reason did they come up with this scale? Why did they feel that there was a need to even have this type of scale? So we know that there's a reason. So we want to hear from them.
I'm really interested to hear from these folks who actually been involved firsthand research with addiction and stigma about addiction, because we know that the stigma may prevent people from engaging in in services, so to speak, reach out for help, either be family and others or professional help, which can often lead to problems worsening.
Yes, hi, is this Ed?
Yes, it is.
Hi, Ed, how
Hi.
are you?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, great.
So we're going to try to wait to see if we can get Sandra on the line for us.
Okay.
And so, Ed, while we have you on the line, can you introduce yourself and tell our audience a little bit about you?
Oh, sure. Are we live right now?
Yes, we
We
are live.
are. You are live, Dr. Necker.
Oh, okay. I'm glad I didn't use any curse words or anything.
Yes.
Although this is internet, I can say whatever I want, right?
You sure can.
Yes.
I'm Ed Newkrag. I'm a chair of the Department of Counseling and Human Services at Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia. And I'm right now teaching a class called Principles of Counseling and Ethics, and my students are listening in, I hope, taking a break from the class. And I'm a licensed psychologist, and I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I write books, and I've seen clients, but I don't see clients currently.
Okay.
That's a quick synopsis. I'm from New York City originally.
Oh, you're originally from New York?
You can hear it, I'm sure.
I do hear a little something there. Ed, hold for me really quick. Let me see if we can get Sandra on the line as well. Okay, I see her that she's trying to call in, but let's see if we can get her on the call. Let me see. Give me 1 minute here. So,
So
no, I don't think that's gonna work. You know what? We have some bills to pay, so hold on while we pay some bills.
Oh, okay.
Oh, pay the bills. Who do we have to pay?
go ahead. I'll let you go through that.
No, I don't know who the bit who
Yeah,
good.
we
Hello.
Yes, hi.
Hi, yes. Hi, this is Dr. Griff.
okay. We have
I'm
Dr.
sorry.
Griffith on the phone.
I think we have everyone with us. Let me make sure that we have everyone on the call with us. Is it Dr. Griffith?
Yes, I am here.
All right. Well, thank you. We have Dr. Newkirch on the phone as well. He's already done his introduction. So tell our audience a little bit about you and where you are.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. So my name is Dr. Sandy Griffith. I am an assistant professor at Texas A&M University in Corpus Christi, and I've been there I'm going into my third year, so I've been there for some time.
All right. Well, it's actually a total of 4 of you who developed this assessment. So can you all tell us how this assessment came about, how the 4 of you came to collaborate?
Sure. I can go with that. So, Sandy, Dr. Griffith, used to be one of my doc students, and she and Mike Kalkbrenner, Dr. Kalkbrenner, was another one of my grad doc students, and we were all sitting around my office one day, and I said to them, because they were 2 of the top students, and I said, how about we do some research together? Because that's what doc students do. They do a lot of research. And so we started brainstorming, and I always like to do research around percentage of people who've been in counseling, percentage of counselors who've been in counseling, percentage of people in the United States who've been in counseling, and they kind of thought that was a little boring. And so they wanted to take
Thank you for being honest.
Yeah, and they kind of were a little pushy with me, but that's how top students are. They're always a little pushy with their mentors. and they said, well, why not we develop a scale to look at why people don't want to go into counseling? And so I said, that's a really good idea. And so we had a great team together, Sandy, myself, and Mike. Mike's his really area of expertise is really statistics and research. So you love having a person like that on a research team.
Absolutely.
You got the right team there. Yes.
Yes, I know most counselors do not like doing the methodology part. So if you have someone who's good with stats, oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, to see him do it is very exciting. Yeah.
And then Sandy could do the grunt work, so that was great. And I could just, and I'm a pretty good writer, so I could take it all and kind of make it into something that's pretty decent.
Oh, well, you're being modest. You have several articles and research articles that you have done. So you're being modest. I know you have well over 23 articles that you have published.
Well, I'm not going to be modest right now. So I have like 60 articles
Mm-hmm.
and 12 books.
See?
So my books are more what I'm into right now. So yeah, but so I am a decent writer, and so this was really a great team, and we started looking at barriers to why people might be attending counseling, and we began to create the scale called the Fit, Stigma, and Values Scale.
Now let me ask, how did you all go about gathering your participants?
That's a great question. So, when you build a scale, you have to show its validity,
Mm-hmm.
show that it's valid, that it's measuring what you want it to measure. And so, if you have a good instrument, for those of you just listening in, if you go on the internet and take this like intelligence scale questionnaire, I can guarantee you it's a poor instrument, because that's not how intelligence scales are made. They're hands-on. You got to be with the person one-on-one, but they're kind of fun, but they're not valid. And so you have to build the validity of the instrument. And building the validity of the instrument means giving it to different populations. And so we decided to start with a population that was easiest for us to assess, which was human service professionals, because I was a member of that association nationally, and I knew I could access that population. So we developed a scale, and we sent out this instrument to about 1,300 people who were in this association, and we began to see if the questions we were asking were good questions to measure barriers to attendance in counseling.
And Dr. Newgard, if you mind if I jumped in here for a moment, I think it asked a question that was asked, and I know you mentioned me kind of doing the grunt work for it, but part of what we also did was look at what was already done,
Mm-hmm.
who was already kind of talking about barriers. So, when we created the assessment, wasn't just kind of pulling questions out of thin air. They were coming from other studies, other people who have been looking at this area. So when we put the instrument together, there was some hope that there would already be some ingrained validity to it, because the questions were created based out of research, based on what we found.
Okay, so this scale, was this more of a pilot type of deal?
You might say so. Yeah, initially the scale was a pilot study, although we did find that the scale held up. Certain items on the scale held up, and so even though it was a pilot, we were able to gather some pretty good information about human service professionals. And wouldn't you want to know why a human service professional, somebody in the field of social service, why they wouldn't want to go into counseling? Because you want them, if anybody's going to be in counseling, it's the people who help others, because they need to be on top of their own stuff.
Dr. Newkirk and Dr. Griffith, can you tell us, based on so far on what we know and based on your scale, why do people not go counseling?
service professionals, we look at counselors, we looked at counseling students, and we looked at high school students. And we hope to look at people in general, like in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
But when we looked at the scale, we found out that it fell into three different categories. One was called fit, one was called stigma, and one was called value. We made up those names.
Okay.
I'll read you 2 or 3 items from each of the different subscales.
Please
Perfect. Perfect.
So fit is has to do with one's sense of comfort in counseling and trust in the process of counseling. So an item might be, my problems are too severe for counseling to help. Or I am concerned that matters I discuss would not be kept confidential. Or there are no counselors in my immediate area. That all has to do with fit into counseling. And those would be 3 reasons why a person would not go into counseling. There are also 10 other items on this one subscale. On stigma is a measure of shame or embarrassment about going into counseling.
Mm-hmm.
Here are a couple of items from that subscale. My colleagues or supervisors, professors or classmates would think less of me. If it would suggest I lack the ability to be an effective helper, or my family would think less of me. So if you're afraid of that, those would be reasons why a person would not go into counseling. And the last subscale is value, which is a measure of the extent to which the person thinks counseling would be beneficial. And one item would be I couldn't afford it, I lack health insurance to go to counseling, I lack the time. So they're not valuing it enough to go to counseling. So it's fit, stigma, and value. And again, there are a number of items under each of the 3 scales. Sandy, do you have anything else?
I think what has been, for us creating this, what has been most amazing for us to see, what Dr. Newkirk mentioned earlier, is how much the scale kind of stood up regardless of the different populations. So we have used this scale in multiple studies that Dr. Newkirk just mentioned, and those 3 subscales keep getting revalidated, which is what you want to see when you create an instrument.
Right. Now, has this scale been tested on the general public and not just people within the profession, but people that would be potential clients other than, peer professionals?
It was tested with high school students, and that's the 4th person that we brought in was Dr. Emily Goodman Scott, and she's a leading person in school counseling. And so we did get access to about 300 or 400 high school students nationally, and we did assess them on this scale. But you're right. I think the next step is to go with kind of maybe a general adult population to see if this scale holds up with them, and that would be really interesting, and that's certainly our next step.
Right, because those are actually the people that we see. So we would be very inclined to know why the general public doesn't, or what their results would be with this type of scale. What barriers do they would stop them from going into counseling?
Do we have any data with respect to the scale itself and the reasons? Do we know with the populations that you've standardized this instrument? Do we know as far as reasons why people would not go counseling? Do we have percentage, so to speak, or numbers on this?
Yes, we do, and I'll refer people to the article to get it, because I actually don't even remember. But if you look up Calc Brenner, Kalk, Calc Brenner, and Google him, and you'll find the fit, stigma, and value scale, and it gives you all the information, the four articles on the scale, and they'll probably pop up. So what I find really interesting also is the fact that 80 to 90% of professionals, counselors, social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists, they've all been in counseling, and So the instrument picks up reasons why they wouldn't go to counseling, but most of them have gone to counseling.
And do you think
But
that's mainly because within our field, while students are in their academic program, they're actually encouraged to go to counseling to resolve any issues that they may think will come up to reduce countertransference within a session?
Yeah.
absolutely. Sorry,
In one article, thanks Dr. Newberg, one of the publications that I think will be really good, if someone is specifically interested in that, is an article that was published in the Clinical Supervisor, and that article does a really good job of talking through how a clinical supervisor can actually use this assessment or use this instrument in supervision with a counseling trainee and help build their awareness about their own stigma or value or fit, those three different domains, because sometimes students are not always aware that they have these things, yet they're going into this profession. So the tool ends up being something that can be used as a talking point to illuminate for that student, you know, this is how you scored on that, because all these different scales can be scored with a higher number indicating whatever the value is for that domain. So if someone scores really high, let's say on the stigma part of it, that indicates to us as a clinical supervisor, this student really stigmatizes counseling in a negative way. So now I have a tool and an instrument to have a very targeted conversation with that student. So it really helps to spare that conversation.
And similarly, with the article we did with high school students, you can actually, school counselors can actually take the instrument and give it to the whole high school and get a sense of which of these areas, or maybe even certain items, are a lot of students are responding to. So if a lot of students are responding to, I would feel embarrassed to go to counseling, then that's something they can address in psychoeducational groups within the schools.
Okay, real quick, everyone, you are listening to In Session on WJZZ Cool TV, the coolest station in the world, and you are with your host, Dr. T, and
Fishta.
and we have special expert guests with us, Dr. Newkirk and Dr. Griffith, joining us on the line, who have developed this scale to help. Well, the hope is to help reduce the stigma around mental health, and they've come up with 3 different categories with this assessment. This fit, so is in which is a sense of comfort. Does the client or a person feel comfortable with going to counseling? Do they trust the counselor, and do they have access? And then the stigma, the shame and embarrassment that goes with it, with their family and peers. And then values, do they actually value counseling? Is it affordable? Is there insurance issues, or is there a lack of time? So those were some of the things that we've talked about in regards to this scale.
So who is this tool useful for? You mentioned the schools, which I really think is a great idea for a school to actually administer to their students, given that there was a part of normative group or standardizing it, because I assume, doctors, that this could be a tool to alert the administration in perhaps training teachers, their counselors, or even students on some of these areas that they can identify. And also, I believe Dr. Griffith mentioned that it could be a good clinical use as well for counselors.
Yeah.
So
Yes, I think that would be. I think that's great. That if you could give this to all the students in the school and get a sense for which areas should be targeted, that would be great. And regionally, different areas might respond differently, and culturally, the different cultures might respond differently to this scale. And some cultures in the United States are less trustful of counselors, as they should be, really, because they've been not treated as well in counseling over the years. certain areas of the country are more amenable. I grew up in New York, and in the area I grew up in New York, to go to counseling was a badge of honor. And I live in the South now, and in the South, going to counseling is not a badge of honor.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very different environment. And so using the scale can help target those types of things that might make it more difficult for some people to go to counseling.
Right. And then we also have to, like you were talking about, cultural differences is why individuals do not go to counseling. But you have certain ethnic groups who families actually tell them, you don't go to counseling. Whatever happens in the home, it stays in the home. And this is
Yes.
something that is embedded in our children, and they grow up thinking, oh, I don't need to go to counseling. I don't need to have anyone in my business. So, how, based on your scale, how can we actually, is there something that measures that component of it?
Yeah, absolutely. That gets measured in the stigma subscale when we have questions like my family would think less of me, my friends would think negatively of me. So like to go back to the example that I mentioned earlier. So I use myself as an example. If as a professor or a clinical supervisor, I see if I were to give that to my interns or give that to my practicum students, particularly being at Hispanic serving institution in South Texas, if I were to see themes show up among my students, kind of adding to what Dr. Newkirk said earlier, now I can have a class discussion about those sorts of things. So that's a class setting. I can also do that one-on-one if I'm supervising one student at a time. So it really is such a good tool to broach a conversation.
Now, do you actually have the stats for the how many participants actually stated that the stigma from family was an issue? Do you have those stats? Like,
I don't know off the top of my head. And we've used the scale, as you mentioned before, with different populations, and so it's hard for me to know the numbers off the top of my head for each of the populations.
Okay. Anything was a part of this a tool? Is there anything related to substance abuse, so to speak, or is that constant in general?
That's a good question, and that would be another population that the scale would be useful in. There are certain items here that someone who's a substance abuser might tend to choose other than some of the other items. That could be really important, and that could really be useful for places that deal with individuals with substance abuse, that they can figure out which items they're most likely to be picking that would choose them not to go to counseling.
So what?
We have a lot of questions on the. Sorry, go ahead, Dr. Newkirk.
I just want to say there are so many populations. I was just thinking as you talked about culture, also men and women. Men go to counseling less frequently than women, and the reasons for that would be really interesting. And to run workshops for men to target those items on the scale to help them feel more comfortable about going to counseling, and so that also would be great.
So when did you all develop this scale? Because it sounds like it's still fresh.
It is. It was 2-3 years ago. 3 years ago.
Yeah.
First developed this
I
scale.
think that because the first publication with human services professionals, that was published in 2017. So we were probably working on this, or at least starting the discussions maybe back in 2016 and getting it going.
Okay.
Exactly, and then we continue to do more populations, and what you're talking about, something you are talking about, I think is so important, and that is to expand this out to look at things like gender and culture, and region, and specific populations like substance abuse populations.
Right. Now, is there anything that you all want us to know? Or our audience?
I'd like people to know that about 25% of Americans every year are in counseling, have been in counseling. About 25% of Americans have been in counseling. And about 80-90% of people who do counseling have been in counseling. So I always find that an interesting comparison. And I want to increase that 25%. I want to make that 80-90% also. Because I think counseling can be helpful for anybody. And there's no reason not to go to counseling. I mean, there are reasons like money. The Obamacare actually helped to expand equity for everybody to go to counseling.
Yep, especially for those with severe, persistent, either be mental illness or substance abuse problems. Yes,
Right.
you are correct.
And then we also have some
Absolutely.
counselors that actually provide pro bono work. So even if you're looking for a counselor, you can't afford it, call anyway and ask if they have any pro bono work or any counselors that perform pro bono service, because some of us do it as a service to the profession.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, Dr. Newkirk. I want to interrupt you momentarily. You said 25% of Americans attend counseling. What was the 80 to 90% again? I missed that. I'm sorry.
80 to 90, probably more like 85 or 90% of mental health professionals have been in counseling,
Got you. Okay.
which I'm glad about because we don't want counsel transference
Exactly.
projecting our issues onto the client. We don't want that to happen, and we can reduce that by being in our own counseling.
Yeah, that was actually just this week with my students. Something that we talked about, some of the challenges that they would actually have during a counseling session, what may arise and how will they address that issue. And all of them pretty much were like, oh, I need to go to counseling. I need to get I didn't realize that this was an issue.
Yes.
Isn't that the case?
So-
yeah. Well, we all need to be in counseling.
Yes. Now, both of you doctors, what do you have to say to our audience, either be professionals or those in other professions who are listening? You mentioned that you'd like that 25% to be increased. What do you want people to know?
Dr. Griffith?
Sure. So you're talking
About
about the general public, correct?
general public
Yes, the
and
general
about
public.
the benefits of counseling. How could we increase that number, considering that our audience is large and mainly or predominantly in Midwestern states like Michigan?
Sure. Well, I think if you have any suspicion, because I think sometimes when something is unknown, so we then tend to make assumptions or interpret something, and for the most part, sometimes we think negatively about something that we don't know, right? So my suggestion, and this is something I also tell my friends as well, is try. Find someone that you can just try to see what counseling is like.
Right.
And maybe you might have to try different times.
Exactly,
I've been
because
to a
sometimes.
counselor, I'm like, I don't know if I'm feeling too well with this lady. So I
Right,
gotta
and
try
it's
someone else.
right, and it's okay to try
And it's
out
okay.
counselors. Yeah, because some personalities may not be a good fit. It may be something else that you just don't gel with that particular counselor or therapist. Shop around
Yes.
until you find
Absolutely.
someone that works best for you.
Absolutely.
And
I would also like to say that 1 in 5 or so people in the United States have a mental health diagnosis every year.
Yep.
That's 20 to 25% of people, and every year that 20 to 25% of people changes.
Yep.
So it's likely that all of you in the audience at some point in your life will have some type of mental health diagnosis.
Yep.
And that counseling can be preventative. It also can just be helpful if you're going through a crisis. And why not? It's insurance generally covers it these days, and it can be so helpful. And if you don't like your counselor or therapist, quit and go see somebody else.
Right.
There's always more out there.
Right, because people go to
Yeah.
counseling for grief issues if they're going through a divorce, even sending their children because of behavior issues, school problems, bullying. So, I mean, we some people come because they're coming out. So there's a lot of reasons why people come into counseling, and it's not just because they may have schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. There are so many existential issues that people actually come in
Correct.
for counseling for. And I actually have more clients with existential issues than severely mentally, that has severely diagnosable disorders.
Often emotional transient
Right.
problems that counseling can be very helpful, short and long term. Also, Dr. Newkirk, I want to ask you. I picked up on something earlier, New York versus some southern parts of our country. What is the
Yes.
main difference? Why do folks in New York, why is it cool to see a counselor there, but it's not down south?
Good
Well,
question.
I think it's cool. It's more likely in New York because a lot. Well, first, it is somewhat cultural, so I'm not going to say all of New York is like this.
Correct.
But
I
there
assume
are,
you're referring to New York City mostly.
yes,
Okay.
I am referring to New York City, although it kind of gets spread out a little bit to the northeast. So one thing is there are a lot of Jewish people who landed up in New York, and some of the original theories by Freud and a lot of the other original counseling theories were developed by Jewish people,
Yeah.
and I think it kind of fit their culture to some degree, the expression of feeling comfortable with that, and things like that. And so it kind of started there and kind of spread out, and there are some other cultures that are less comfortable with that. And so that's probably why it started kind of in New York area, but kind of spread out into the Northeast a little bit. And then you find, if you go to the Midwest where you are, you find that the type of personality is less comfortable with those things, sharing things openly. My family growing up we talk about almost anything. Some cultures are more comfortable with that, other cultures are less comfortable with that. And I'm not saying one is better or worse than another, but it does impact one's likelihood of going into counseling.
Absolutely, absolutely. I definitely agree. One's upbringing has a definite impact on whether someone actually receives counseling services versus someone who doesn't.
Absolutely.
Dr. Griffith, being that you are there in the field supervising and doing other functionings, what are you seeing with respect to COVID, post-election stress and anxiety, substance use or abuse? Can you give us your thoughts in that area, please?
Well, I'm a professor, so but I do supervise students who are out in the field. And something I was thinking about as you were talking earlier, and maybe this is just my wishful thinking or my hope. I think this year has been like an existential year for so many
Yep.
of us.
To put it
So
mildly,
I think,
yes.
so I think there's been a lot more people seeking counseling this year than maybe before. So hopefully that's a good thing. But from looking at my students, and we even have a clinic where at my university, and we're seeing high numbers. People are seeking counseling. People are coming to groups, seeing a lot of stress with parenting, now with homeschool, and there's so
Yeah.
much happening. And I think that reality of adults or parents have to get to a space of kind of surrendering. I don't know how to fix this or how to control this, and we're just kind of presenting them with making peace with a lot of things. So those are some of the things I see coming up. I'm not too sure of substance use, but I'm pretty confident in guessing that is also skyrocketing. I know a lot about domestic violence numbers are going up.
Yes.
So there are a lot of implications to what is happening this year alone that we're going to be dealing with for quite a number of years after.
So, and talking about domestic violence, we know that 85% of child abuse is reported either through school or other professionals. So, given that, again, we're isolated somewhat, that may have some major impact. We also know it is our observation in working with people, supervising, and also working with community mental health and hospitals in our local areas, that there has been an increase, significant increase in acute problems with also teachers.
Yes.
Anything you guys can tell us about our teachers, that I know they're struggling, because not only they're struggling to teach which they were not trained to, but obviously they're living in the same mess we all are, and they have their children in their lives as well.
I can only say the same thing I always say: teaching is the hardest job in the world, and now this has made it harder. And I'm talking about teaching college. I'm talking about teaching high school kids, and middle school kids, and elementary kids. That is the hardest job in the world.
Yep.
And these teachers now, they have to do it online. They have to do it in person. They have to be concerned about COVID. Oh my God, I just can't even imagine it. They have to worry about their own kids.
Yeah.
It's just unbelievable.
Yep.
And that's the lowest paid.
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Dr. Griffith.
And this year, and I think too, this year I've been able to go to so many online trainings. I've been afforded the opportunity to do that. But I think one of the big takeaways for me, and I think for the U.S., for those who are interested in seeing that information, is the inequities in education across this country. And some teachers were able to maybe transition easier than others based on whether they're in a Title I school or the area. Oh, there's so many mitigating circumstances that influenced what the outcomes are. This is just shining a light on all of the inequities in education in so many ways.
Absolutely. And then the wealthier neighborhoods where they are more able to get better teachers, better schools, and better internet connections, and their parents tend to be more educated, so the kids don't lose as much as in the poorer areas.
So it's very unfortunate that we may see more disparities in future, as if there isn't enough of that already, as we see it clearly in our system, and so much of it has come to light within more recent times.
Right. Can you all tell us your future projects that you have coming up before we close out our session?
I'm so sorry. Could you repeat that last question? I'm so sorry.
Can you tell us your next projects? What are you all up to next? Either individually or together?
Well, we Dr. Newkirk and I are not working on anything together right now, and that's because of me. He's been asking me.
I don't love me anymore.
That is, do not lie to the people of Detroit. Do not do that. But myself right now, I'm also part of a research consortium where we focus on family strengthening research. That's a multi-university consortium. So I work together with professors from University of South Carolina, Virginia Commonwealth University, William and Mary, all across the U.S. So we work on different grant-funded projects. So my next project is looking at just some of the contextual factors around adolescents who either engage in or do not engage in aggressive or bullying behaviors at school. So I was able to work on that with other professors, again, across the U.S. through a grant of the Department of Justice. I'm really excited. This is my first time getting into research and data specifically with adolescents. So it's something I'm looking forward to.
Well, you're definitely going to have to check back with us when you have that research complete so that we can talk about those results and school bullying as a whole. So we'll definitely have you back on the show to discuss that project.
So, Dr. Griffith and Dr. Newkirk, I truly want to show...
Wait, what does Dr. Newkirk have going on before we...
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you. I'm always revising my books. I would like to do the same study with the general United States population. And I just recently, I don't know if this is going to happen, but I have a friend of mine who's a former Navy SEAL, and he's just finishing his doctorate in counseling, and I'm talking to him about doing some workshops called Macho Men, Living and Dying in a Man's World.
Ooh.
Love it.
And so just addressing some of the issues that make men alive and also kill them. So that's kind of my thing right now.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you both for joining us. It has been a true pleasure. And everyone, you have been watching or listening to In Session on WJZZ Cool TV, the coolest station in the world. And you can catch Dr. Fishta and I each and every Thursday from 5 to 6 p.m. So tune in next Thursday.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Roger on the phones just doesn't work.
Well,
I think next time we'll set it up directly on the phone.
well, and I think that we're still live too.
Are we?
I believe so, because that camera has not gone off yet.